David and Grace had built something beautiful together in their modest apartment in the Lakeview district of Portland. After 5 years of marriage, they had found their rhythm, the kind of comfortable partnership that others admired from the outside. David worked as a senior accountant at Thompson & Associates, a mid-sized firm downtown. His days were filled with spreadsheets, client meetings, and the occasional late-night audits during tax season. The work was demanding, but it provided stability. Grace, meanwhile, had turned her passion for photography into a thriving business. She specialized in family portraits and ran her studio from their spare bedroom, with backdrops hung against the walls and lighting equipment carefully organized in the corners. Their life wasn't extravagant, but it was theirs. They had routines that worked: Sunday morning pancakes, Friday movie nights, and long walks through the neighborhood park where they planned their future. They were saving for a down payment on a small house in the suburbs, something with a backyard where they could plant tomatoes and maybe get a dog. Like any marriage, theirs had its challenges. There were disagreements about money, occasional arguments about whose turn it was to do the dishes, and nights when exhaustion made them both irritable. But they always found their way back to each other. Sometimes with words, sometimes with gestures, a cup of coffee made just right, a hand reaching across the bed in the middle of the night. Then Maya arrived. Maya was Grace's childhood friend from their high school days in Seattle. They had been inseparable once, sharing secrets and dreams the way teenage girls do. But life had pulled them in different directions after graduation. Maya had moved around frequently, chasing relationships and opportunities that never quite panned out. She showed up on a Thursday evening in early October, standing at their door with a suitcase and mascara streaked down her cheeks. Her boyfriend had kicked her out after a massive fight, she explained between sobs. She had nowhere else to go. Could she stay just for a few days? Grace didn't hesitate. She pulled Maya inside, made her tea, and insisted she take the couch until she got back on her feet. David, coming home later that evening, found them sitting together in the living room, catching up on years of missed time. He smiled warmly and welcomed Maya, telling her to make herself at home. In those first weeks, Maya seemed like the perfect houseguest. She cooked dinner before Grace returned from afternoon photo sessions. She ran errands for David, picking up dry cleaning or grabbing groceries on her way back from job interviews. She was funny and lively, filling their apartment with stories and laughter. But Maya was also watching. Always watching. She noticed how the young mothers who came for family portraits sometimes lingered to chat with David when he came home early. She noticed the way his phone would buzz with text messages during dinner, work emails he said, though he always angled the screen away slightly. She noticed how Grace would sometimes stare at their bank statements with a worried crease between her eyebrows, calculating whether they could afford both the mortgage savings and the new camera lens she needed. Maya collected these observations like someone gathering kindling for a fire. She didn't act on them immediately. She simply watched and waited, her mind working through possibilities like a chess player thinking several moves ahead. David, oblivious to the undercurrents, was simply relieved that Grace had company during his long work days. He had worried about her being lonely, spending so many hours alone with clients and then editing photos late into the night. Having Maya around seemed good for her. They laughed together, shared meals, reminisced about old times. He had no idea that the friend he had welcomed into his home was already beginning to plant seeds that would grow into something destructive. Seeds of doubt, suspicion, and distrust that would spread through their marriage like cracks through glass. It started small. So small that Grace barely noticed at first. One Saturday morning, as they prepared breakfast together in the kitchen, Maya leaned in close while chopping vegetables. "Your husband is very charming," she said casually, her voice light. "Very friendly with people. Maybe too friendly, if you know what I mean." Grace laughed it off, thinking it was just Maya's tendency toward drama. "He's just polite," she replied, cracking eggs into a bowl. But Maya didn't laugh. She simply raised an eyebrow and continued chopping, letting the comment hang in the air like smoke. Later that day, when David returned from a morning run looking refreshed and happy, Maya greeted him with an exaggerated smile. "Well, well, don't you look nice? Who are you trying to impress out there?" She said it playfully, but Grace noticed how Maya's eyes tracked David's phone when he set it on the counter. It was harmless on the surface. Just friendly banter. But something about it lodged itself in Grace's mind, a tiny splinter of doubt that she didn't even realize had entered. Over the following days, Maya became an expert at this subtle art. She would casually mention seeing one of David's female co-workers at the coffee shop. She asked about him, Maya would say with a knowing look. Seemed very interested in how he was doing. She would sigh dramatically while folding laundry and say, "Men these days, you really have to keep your eyes open. One minute everything is fine, the next minute you're wondering where they've been." She never accused David of anything directly. That would be too obvious, too easy to defend against. Instead, she painted impressions, created atmospheres of suspicion, and let Grace's imagination do the rest of the work. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, it began to work. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more compelling tales about relationships, family dynamics, and life lessons. Drop a comment below telling me what you think of Maya's behavior so far. Is she just being protective, or is something else going on? Is coming next, and trust me, things are about to get much more complicated. 3 weeks into Maya's stay, Grace found herself doing something she never thought she would do. Checking David's phone while he was in the shower. She hated herself for it. Her hands trembled as she picked up the device from the nightstand, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She unlocked it quickly, knowing his passcode, and scrolled through his messages with a sick feeling in her stomach. There was nothing there. Just work emails, texts from his brother about a basketball game, a reminder from their dentist. Nothing suspicious, nothing incriminating. She set the phone down exactly where she'd found it, feeling both relieved and ashamed. What was she becoming? David had never given her a real reason to distrust him. Yet here she was, sneaking through his private messages like some paranoid character in a bad movie. But Maya had been so persistent with her comments, so consistent with her concerns. And Grace couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was blind to something obvious. That Wednesday evening, David called to say he'd be home late. An important client meeting had run over, and they still had several points to discuss. It wasn't unusual. His job often required flexibility with hours, especially during quarterly reviews. Grace was finishing up a session with a couple celebrating their anniversary when Maya wandered into the studio area. She had that look on her face, the one Grace was beginning to recognize, the expression that meant she was about to share something important. "Grace, honey, I need to tell you something," Maya began, settling onto the arm of the couch. "And please don't shoot the messenger, but I think you need to know." Grace felt her stomach drop. "Know what?" "My cousin Jennifer works at the Riverside Bistro downtown. She just texted me." Maya held up her phone as if offering evidence. "She said she saw David there about an hour ago. And he wasn't alone." Grace's hands went still on her camera. "What do you mean, not alone?" "He was with a woman. Jennifer said she had red hair, wore a business suit. They were sitting pretty close together, looking at something on a laptop." Maya's voice carried that careful balance of concern and revelation. "Now, maybe it's completely innocent, but Jennifer said they looked comfortable with each other. Too comfortable for just colleagues." Grace wanted to dismiss it. David had mentioned meeting clients all the time. There was probably a perfectly reasonable explanation. But Maya's words were already working their way into her mind, connecting with all the other small comments and observations from the past weeks. "Did your cousin say anything else?" Grace heard herself ask. Maya shook her head slowly. "Just that she thought I should know. In case, something was going on. Sometimes we're the last ones to see what's right in front of us." Grace tried to focus on editing the anniversary photos, but her concentration was shattered. Every few minutes, she found herself glancing at the clock, calculating how long David had been gone, wondering who the red-haired woman was. When David finally came home around 9:30, carrying takeout containers, Grace was wound tight as a spring. Hey, sorry I'm so late, he said, kissing her cheek. The Henderson meeting went on forever. They're still deciding whether to invest in the expansion. Brought you some pad thai from that place you like. Who else was at the meeting? Grace asked, trying to keep her voice casual. David set the food on the counter, loosening his tie. Just me and Bill Henderson initially, but then Sarah Mitchell from the investment group joined us around 7. Why? Sarah Mitchell. Is she the one with red hair? David looked puzzled. Yeah, she is. How did you? He paused, realization crossing his face. Grace, were you checking up on me? Maya's cousin saw you at Riverside Bistro. Okay, yes, we were at Riverside. That's where Bill wanted to meet. David's voice carried an edge of frustration now. This is about a multi-million-dollar account. Sarah needed to review our projections. What exactly is the problem here? The problem is that you're spending evenings with strange women, and I have to hear about it from Maya's cousin. Strange women? Grace, she's a financial analyst. This is my job. David ran his hand through his hair, clearly exhausted. What's going on with you lately? Ever since Maya moved in, you've been different. Suspicious. Distant. Maybe I have good reason to be suspicious. The argument escalated from there, their voices rising in a way that was new and frightening. They'd argued before, but this felt different. There was an accusation underlying Grace's words that hadn't been there before, and a defensiveness in David's responses that made everything worse. Maya, conveniently, was in her room during all of this. But Grace was certain she could hear every word through the thin walls. They went to bed angry that night, lying on opposite sides of the mattress like strangers. In the darkness, Grace's mind raced with questions. Was she being unreasonable? Or was David hiding something? The truth was, she didn't know anymore. Maya's constant comments had created a fog of uncertainty that clouded everything Grace thought she knew about her marriage. Over the next few days, the tension in the apartment was palpable. David started working even later, partly because of genuine work demands, but also, Grace suspected, because he didn't want to come home to more accusations. She buried herself in photography work, accepting more clients than she could comfortably handle. Maya, meanwhile, moved through the apartment like someone who knew she was winning a game no one else realized they were playing. She made sympathetic comments to Grace about how hard this must be, and asked David with false innocence if everything was okay between them. Then came the Friday that changed everything. David had mentioned that morning he'd be late again. A dinner meeting with potential clients at the Mason Hotel restaurant. Grace had simply nodded, too tired to argue anymore. But Maya had other plans. Around 6:30, as Grace was packing up her equipment after a session, Maya appeared in the doorway wearing her jacket and carrying her purse. I'm going to say something, and you can choose to listen or not, Maya announced. But if I were you, I would go to the Mason Hotel right now and see for myself what your husband is really doing at these business dinners. Grace looked up sharply. Maya, I'm not going to spy on my husband. Why not? If he's innocent, then you'll see that and you can stop worrying. But if he's not? Maya let the sentence trail off. Meaningfully. Look, my friend Keisha works at the Mason. She just texted me that David is there. With the same red-haired woman from before. And Grace, they're at a corner table, the romantic kind. Grace felt something cold settle in her chest. You're texting your friends to spy on my husband now? I'm trying to protect you. Someone has to, because you're clearly too trusting to see what's happening. Maya's voice took on an urgent tone. Come with me. We'll just look from a distance. If it's nothing, we'll leave. But you need to know the truth. Against her better judgment, against every instinct telling her this was wrong, Grace found herself agreeing. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was all those weeks of accumulated doubt. Maybe she just needed to see with her own eyes so she could finally silence the questions Maya had planted in her mind. They took Maya's car to avoid being spotted. The drive downtown felt surreal, like Grace was watching herself from outside her body. What was she doing? This wasn't who she was. She didn't follow her husband. She trusted him. Or at least she used to. When they arrived at the Mason Hotel, Maya parked across the street with a clear view of the restaurant's large windows. There, Maya pointed. Corner table by the window. Grace's heart stopped. There was David, exactly where Maya said he'd be. And yes, he was with the red-haired woman. Sarah Mitchell, he'd called her. They were looking at something on a tablet between them, their heads close together, and yes, they were smiling. If Grace had been thinking clearly, she might have noticed the file folders on the table. She might have seen the calculator and spreadsheets visible on the tablet screen. She might have realized that David's body language was professional, not intimate. But she wasn't thinking clearly. Weeks of Maya's poisonous suggestions had clouded her judgment. All she saw was her husband, late at night, at a romantic restaurant, sitting very close to an attractive woman who wasn't his wife. "I told you," Maya said softly beside her, her voice carrying a note of vindication. "I'm so sorry, Grace. But now you know." Grace felt tears burning in her eyes. She turned away before David could spot them, and Maya drove them home in silence. But that silence was about to explode into something much worse. Because Maya's plan had only just begun. Grace spent a sleepless night staring at the ceiling, replaying the image of David and Sarah at that corner table. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them smiling, heads bent together in what looked like intimacy but might have been just collaboration. The uncertainty was torture. David had come home around 11, tired but in good spirits. He'd kissed her forehead and said the meeting went well, the clients were likely to sign. Grace had pretended to be asleep, unable to face him, unable to decide what she believed. But Maya had no such hesitations about what to do next. The next morning, while Grace was in the shower and David had already left for the office, Maya made her move. She started with David's sister Angela, sending a carefully crafted text message. "Hey Angela, it's Maya, Grace's friend staying with them. I'm really worried about Grace. I think David might be having an affair. I saw him with another woman twice now, and Grace is heartbroken but trying to keep it together. Can you check on her?" Then she texted David's mother, Patricia. "Hi Mrs. Chin, this is Maya. I've been staying with David and Grace. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think you should know. David has been meeting a woman at restaurants and hotels. Grace witnessed it herself, but she's too embarrassed to tell you. As family, maybe you can talk to him." She sent similar messages to Grace's two brothers, to David's best friend from college, even to their pastor at the community church they occasionally attended. Each message was slightly different, tailored to the recipient, but all carried the same poison. David was cheating, Grace was suffering, and someone needed to intervene. By noon, Grace's phone started ringing. First it was her brother Marcus. "Grace, what the hell is going on? Maya says David's running around with some woman." Then Angela called, her voice tight with anger. "Is it true? Is my brother actually having an affair?" Grace's head spun as she tried to understand how this had spread so quickly. "Who told you that?" "I never said. Maya told me. She said you saw them together at a hotel restaurant." "Grace, why didn't you call me immediately?" "It wasn't. I mean, I did see them, but I don't know if..." Grace struggled to explain, but Angela had already made up her mind. "You're defending him? Grace, wake up. If Maya saw it and you saw it, then it's real. Don't be naive." The calls kept coming. Each person who contacted Grace had already heard a version of the story, and each version was slightly worse than the last. By the time Grace compared notes, she realized that Maya's account had evolved as it spread. The business dinner had become a romantic dinner. The meeting at a restaurant had transformed into checking into a hotel together. The colleague had turned into his mistress. David's phone was equally bombarded. His mother called in tears, demanding to know how he could betray Grace this way. His sister sent angry texts accusing him of throwing away his marriage. His best friend Jake sent a simple message. "Bro, what are you thinking?" When David came home that evening, he was confused, angry, and hurt. "Grace, what is happening? My entire family thinks I'm having an affair." My mother literally cried on the phone. "Jake says I'm an idiot. Where is all of this coming from?" Grace was sitting on the couch, looking exhausted. Maya told people. "She said she was worried about me." "Worried about you? She's destroying us." David pulled out his phone, scrolling through the messages. "Look at this. Look what people are saying. And it all traces back to her." Maya chose that moment to emerge from her room, wearing an expression of practiced concern. "I didn't mean for it to blow up like this. I just thought your family should know the truth." "The truth?" David turned on her, his voice rising. "The truth is that Sarah Mitchell is a financial analyst reviewing a major client account. The truth is that every interaction you've reported has been completely professional. The truth is that you've been manipulating my wife and spreading lies to my family." Maya's eyes widened, and she took a step back. "I only reported what I saw. You were at that hotel restaurant with another woman, sitting very close, late at night. What was I supposed to think? You were supposed to mind your own business. This is my marriage, not yours." "David, don't yell at her," Grace interjected, though her voice lacked conviction. "She was just trying to." "Trying to what? Help? By texting my mother? By sending messages to our pastor?" David's frustration was palpable. "Grace, can't you see what she's doing?" But Grace was too confused, too overwhelmed by the avalanche of family opinions and accusations to think clearly. Part of her knew David had a point. But another part, the part that had been listening to Maya's insinuations for weeks, wondered if there was truth hidden somewhere in the chaos. That night, David slept in the living room. It was the first time in their marriage they'd spent the night in separate rooms, and the symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. Maya, meanwhile, lay in the guest room listening to the sounds of their marriage fracturing. And she smiled in the darkness. The next day was Sunday, and Grace's mother called requesting an emergency family meeting that afternoon. Grace tried to decline, but her mother was insistent. "We need to address this as a family. Everyone's talking, and we need to get the facts straight." The meeting was held at Patricia Chen's house, David's childhood home. The living room was packed with relatives, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, even a couple of concerned church friends. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with judgment and curiosity. David arrived with Grace, both of them looking like defendants walking into a trial. Maya came too, claiming she should be there to provide her account. Patricia Chen, a small but formidable woman in her 60s, sat in the center of the room like a judge. She looked at her son with disappointment that cut deeper than any words. "David," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "your father and I raised you better than this. If you have problems in your marriage, you work on them. You don't go looking for comfort elsewhere." "Mom, I'm not," David started, but Angela interrupted. "Let Maya speak. She's the one who witnessed everything." All eyes turned to Maya, who stood up slowly, playing the role of reluctant witness perfectly. "I didn't want to cause problems," she began, her voice soft and pained. "But I couldn't stand by and watch Grace suffer. I saw David at the Mason Hotel restaurant 3 times in the past 2 weeks. Each time with the same woman. Red hair, professional clothes, very attractive. They were always sitting close, talking intimately." "That's a lie," David said firmly. "I've met with Sarah Mitchell twice for business meetings. Not 3 times, and never intimately." Maya shook her head sadly. "David, I understand you need to protect yourself, but I have proof." She pulled out her phone. "I took a photo the second time. I thought if things got worse, Grace might need evidence." She held up her phone, showing a photo of David and Sarah at their table. The angle made it look damning. They were leaning in toward the tablet between them, but in the photo, it looked like they were leaning toward each other. The room erupted in murmurs. Someone gasped. Grace's brother stood up, anger flashing across his face. "That's enough," Marcus said loudly. "David, you need to admit what you've done and figure out how to fix this." David felt the walls closing in. How could he defend himself against a photograph, against a narrative that Maya had been carefully constructing for weeks? Even though he knew the truth, he could see in the faces around him that many had already convicted him. "That meeting was about the Henderson account," David said, his voice strained but steady. "Sarah Mitchell works for Henderson Investments. We were reviewing financial projections. If you look closely at that photo, you can see the documents on the table." "Documents can be a cover story," Maya said quietly, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've seen that before. Men who pretend business meetings are innocent when they're really—" "Stop it," Grace suddenly shouted, surprising everyone including herself. She stood up, tears streaming down her face. "Just stop. All of you. This is my marriage, and I don't even know what's true anymore." The room fell silent. Grace looked around at all the faces, family members who loved her, who thought they were helping, but who were actually making everything worse. Then she looked at Maya, really looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, she saw something she'd been too blind to notice. Maya wasn't sad. She wasn't concerned. There was something else in her eyes, something that looked almost like satisfaction. "You took that photo on purpose," Grace said slowly, the realization dawning. "You followed him. You've been following him." Maya's expression flickered for just a moment. "I was protecting you." "No," Grace said, her voice growing stronger. "No, you were creating this. These problems didn't exist before you came. David and I were fine. We had a good marriage. And you." But before Grace could finish her thought, David's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his face went pale. "It's Jim Henderson," he said quietly. "The client." He answered the call, and everyone watched as his expression went from concerned to shocked to devastated. When he hung up, he looked at Grace with eyes full of pain. "Henderson is pulling out of the deal. Someone sent him an anonymous email saying I was unreliable and having personal problems that might affect my judgment. The deal is dead." The room erupted in chaos. But through it all, Grace kept her eyes on Maya. And finally, she saw the truth. The aftermath of the Henderson deal falling through was devastating. David sat in his car in the office parking lot for 2 hours after getting the news, unable to face going home, unable to process what had just happened. That account represented 6 months of work, countless hours of preparation, and what would have been a significant promotion. Now it was gone, not because he'd failed, but because someone had deliberately sabotaged him. When he finally came home, he found Grace sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. She looked up at him, and he was surprised to see that she wasn't crying. She looked angry. "I've been doing some thinking," Grace said. "And I need to ask Maya some questions." Maya, who had been in the kitchen making tea, froze slightly before turning around with her usual concerned expression. "Of course. Whatever you need." "Sit down," Grace said, and there was something in her voice that made it not a request but a command. Maya sat, looking between Grace and David with exaggerated innocence. "What's going on? You said you saw David at the Mason Hotel 3 times, Grace began. "But David has only been there twice for meetings. I checked his calendar. So either you're lying about the number of times, or you were following him to places he didn't mention to me." "I must have miscounted," Maya said quickly. "Or maybe it was a different restaurant. They all look similar downtown." "No, they don't," Grace continued. "And you said your cousin Jennifer saw David at Riverside Bistro, but when I called Jennifer today, yes, I called her, she said she didn't even know David by sight. She said you asked her to go there and watch for someone matching his description." Maya's face flickered with the first genuine emotion Grace had seen in weeks. Panic. "That's not. Jennifer must have forgotten. I also talked to Keisha." Your friend who supposedly works at the Mason Hotel. Grace's voice was ice cold now. She doesn't work there. She works at a coffee shop 3 blocks away. She admitted you asked her to send you a text at a specific time saying she'd seen David, but she felt uncomfortable lying, so she just sent you a generic text that you then interpreted however you wanted. David leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Maya. You staged all of it. I didn't stage anything. Maya's voice rose defensively. I saw what I saw. You saw what you wanted to see, Grace said. Because you've been trying to destroy my marriage from the day you arrived. That's insane. Why would I? Because you're jealous, David interrupted. You've always been jealous of Grace. Even in high school, from what she's told me. She got into the art program you wanted. She got the scholarship. She built a successful business while you bounced from job to job. And worst of all, she found a happy marriage while your relationships kept failing. Maya's face flushed red. That's not fair. I've had bad luck, that's all. And I've been nothing but supportive of Grace. Supportive. Grace let out a bitter laugh. You moved into our home and immediately started planting seeds of doubt. Every conversation was designed to make me suspicious. Every concern you raised was calculated to damage my trust in David. You didn't want me to be happy because you aren't happy. That's not true. Maya stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I was trying to protect you from a cheating husband. He wasn't cheating. Grace shouted back, standing as well. There was nothing to protect me from until you created it. You followed him, you manipulated your friends into sending fake messages, you took photographs from misleading angles, and then you spread lies to our entire family. David pulled out his phone. I did some digging too. The anonymous email to Henderson? It came from a burner email account, but it was sent from our Wi-Fi network. The only people with access to our Wi-Fi are Grace, me, and you. Maya's eyes darted to the door as if calculating whether she could leave. You can't prove it was me. Actually, I can, David said calmly, though his jaw was tight with anger. I asked our internet provider for the connection logs. The email was sent from a device with your phone's MAC address. The police could confirm it if we pressed charges. The room fell silent. Maya stood there, trapped by the evidence, her careful facade finally crumbling. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Harder, stripped of the false sweetness she'd maintained for weeks. You don't understand what it's like, she said, and now there was genuine bitterness in her tone. Watching everyone else get the life you want. Grace always had everything so easy. Perfect grades, perfect career, perfect husband. Meanwhile, I've worked just as hard and gotten nothing. Do you know what that feels like? To always be second best. So you tried to take it from me? Grace asked, her voice breaking slightly. You tried to destroy the one thing that made me happy? I wanted you to understand what it felt like to lose something important, Maya admitted, tears now running down her face. But these tears looked real, not performed. Every boyfriend I've had has left me. Every job I've tried has failed. I have nothing. And you had everything. It wasn't fair. So you decided to make it fair by ruining my marriage? Maya didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. David stood up. You need to leave. Tonight. I don't care where you go, but you cannot stay here another minute. Grace. Maya turned to her old friend, something pleading in her eyes. You understand, don't you? We've been friends since we were 15. That has to count for something. Grace looked at Maya, really looked at her, and felt a profound sadness mixed with her anger. This person had been her friend once, someone she'd shared secrets with, laughed with, trusted completely. But that friendship had been poisoned by jealousy that Grace had been too naive to see. We were friends, Grace said softly. But you destroyed that the moment you chose to hurt me. You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore, Grace said firmly. You made your choices, Maya. You planted lies, turned our family against us, and nearly destroyed David's career. You did this to yourself. Maya stared at them both for a long moment, and Grace could see her cycling through emotions: anger, defiance, self-pity, and finally resignation. Without another word, she turned and walked to the guest room to pack. 50 minutes later, Maya emerged with her suitcase. She paused at the door, looking back at Grace one last time. I'm sorry, she said, and for the first time, it sounded sincere. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. I hope someday you can forgive me. Grace said nothing. She simply opened the door and held it as Maya walked out of their apartment and out of their lives. When the door closed, Grace and David stood in the entryway, not speaking, not moving. The apartment felt different somehow, lighter, but also strange, like waking up from a nightmare and trying to remember what reality felt like. I'm sorry, David finally said. I'm sorry I got angry when you questioned me. I'm sorry I didn't see what she was doing sooner. I'm sorry too, Grace replied, tears now flowing freely. I'm sorry I doubted you. I should have trusted you. We promised to trust each other, and I let her break that promise. David pulled her into his arms, and Grace buried her face in his shoulder. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other, feeling the weight of the past weeks beginning to lift. But they both knew that removing Maya from their home was only the first step. The damage she'd caused extended far beyond their apartment walls. Their families still believed the lies. David's career had been damaged. And most importantly, the trust between them had been shaken in ways that wouldn't be easy to repair. What do we do now? Grace asked quietly. David pulled back to look at her. We tell the truth. We tell everyone the truth about what Maya did and why. We rebuild. Together. Grace nodded. Together. It wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in weeks, Grace felt hope that they could actually do it. The next morning, David called Jim Henderson. He explained everything: the manipulation, the false accusations, the sabotage. He offered to provide evidence and suggested Henderson speak with Sarah Mitchell, who could confirm the professional nature of their meetings. To David's surprise, Henderson listened carefully. I appreciate your honesty, he said. Let me look into this. I'll be in touch. Then came the harder part: facing their families. David and Grace called a second family meeting, and this time they came prepared. They brought phone records, email logs, statements from Maya's friends who admitted to sending false messages at her request, and most importantly, a calm, detailed explanation of what had actually happened. Patricia Chen sat in the same chair she'd occupied during the first meeting, but this time her expression was different. As David laid out the evidence, her face shifted from skepticism to shock to anger. That girl, she said quietly, her voice shaking with controlled fury. She came into our family and tried to tear it apart with lies. Angela, David's sister, looked devastated. I can't believe I accused you. David, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to your side before jumping to conclusions. Grace's brother Marcus stood up. This is on all of us. We let gossip spread like wildfire without verifying the facts. We got caught up in the drama and forgot to actually investigate. One by one, family members apologized. Some were more sincere than others. A few seemed embarrassed that they'd been so easily manipulated. But gradually, the atmosphere in the room shifted from accusatory to supportive. Pastor Williams, who had also attended, cleared his throat. This is a powerful lesson for all of us about the danger of bearing false witness and spreading gossip. The Bible warns us about this in Proverbs. A troublemaker plants seeds of strife. Gossip separates the best of friends. Maya planted those seeds, but we watered them by repeating her stories without question. Grace felt tears welling up again, but these were different. Tears of relief rather than pain. Thank you all for listening. And for believing us now. What about Maya? David's mother asked. What happens to her? David and Grace exchanged glances. They discussed this the night before. She's gone, Grace said simply. And we've decided not to press charges, even though we could. We just want to move forward and rebuild our lives. Too merciful if you ask me, Patricia muttered. But she nodded in understanding. The meeting ended with hugs and more apologies. As people filed out, several family members stopped to squeeze David's shoulder or hug Grace tightly. The damage Maya had caused was real, but the family was beginning to heal. Over the next week, David worked tirelessly to repair his professional reputation. He met with colleagues, explained the situation to his boss, and worked with the IT department to trace the malicious email. The company took the matter seriously. Sabotage was a fireable offense, and they wanted to ensure it didn't happen again. To David's amazement and relief, Jim Henderson called 3 days later. I spoke with Sarah Mitchell and reviewed the situation, Henderson said. I believe you were the victim of a malicious attack, and I don't think that should cost you the account. If you're still interested, I'd like to move forward with the deal. David could barely speak. Yes. Absolutely yes. Thank you for giving me another chance. You earned it with your honesty, Henderson replied. That's the kind of integrity I want in a business partner. When David told Grace the news that evening, she threw her arms around him, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. It felt like the first truly good news they'd had in months. But while the external situation was improving, there was still work to be done on their marriage itself. The trust that Maya had eroded needed to be actively rebuilt, and both David and Grace knew it wouldn't happen overnight. They decided to see a marriage counselor, something they'd never thought they'd need. In their first session, the counselor, a kind woman named Dr. Patricia Shaw, listened to their story and then offered some perspective. What Maya did was manipulative and destructive, Dr. Shaw said. But she was only able to do it because she found vulnerabilities in your relationship that she could exploit. That doesn't excuse her behavior, but it does mean there's work you both can do to strengthen those areas. Over the following weeks, they worked on communication. David learned to be more open about his schedule and his interactions with colleagues, not because Grace demanded it, but because he wanted to make her feel secure. Grace learned to voice her concerns directly instead of letting them fester into suspicion. They also worked on boundaries. They realized they'd let Maya settle into their home without any real discussion about expectations or time limits. They'd been so focused on being good hosts that they'd neglected to protect their own space. In the future, Grace said during one session, if someone needs to stay with us, we set clear boundaries from the start. Time limits, privacy expectations, all of it. Agreed, David said. And we check in with each other regularly about how it's affecting us. No more assuming everything is fine. Slowly, day by day, their marriage began to feel solid again. The wounds Maya had inflicted were healing, leaving scars that reminded them to be more careful, more communicative, more present with each other. 3 months after Maya left, Grace was editing photos in her studio when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of her. Hello, Grace. It's Maya. Grace's hand tightened around the phone. She hadn't heard from Maya since that night, and part of her had hoped she never would again. What do you want? I wanted you to know that I'm in therapy now, working on my issues with jealousy and comparison. My therapist says I have a lot of unresolved trauma from childhood, and I was projecting it onto you. Grace said nothing, waiting. I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness, Maya continued, her voice small. I know I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. And I'm truly, genuinely sorry for what I did. You deserved better from me. Grace felt a complex swirl of emotions, anger still, but also sadness for the friendship they'd lost, and perhaps the tiniest seed of compassion for the pain Maya must have been carrying all those years. I appreciate you telling me that, Grace said carefully. And I'm glad you're getting help. But Maya, I can't have you in my life. What you did was too destructive. I understand, Maya said quickly. I'm not asking to be friends again. I just needed to apologize properly. You and David deserved that. They talked for a few more minutes, carefully, distantly, like two people who had once known each other well but were now strangers. When they hung up, Grace sat quietly for a moment, processing the conversation. That evening, she told David about the call. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. Grace thought for a moment. "Sad, mostly. Sad for what we lost, sad for the person she became, sad that jealousy can poison someone so completely. But also, I don't know, maybe slightly hopeful that she's trying to change." "Do you want to reconnect with her?" "No," Grace said firmly. "Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. But I can wish her well from a distance." David nodded, pulling her close. "That seems healthy." As the seasons changed and life moved forward, David and Grace found their rhythm again. They continued therapy for several more months, working through not just the damage from Maya's betrayal but other small issues they'd been neglecting. Their marriage emerged stronger for it, not perfect, but more honest, more resilient. They eventually bought that house in the suburbs they'd been saving for, with a yard where Grace could plant flowers and David could set up a grill. On moving day, as they stood in their new living room surrounded by boxes, Grace looked at David and smiled. "We made it," she said simply. "We did," David agreed, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Together." And as they began unpacking their life into this new space, this home that was truly theirs, untainted by manipulation or lies, they both felt the weight of the past finally beginning to lift. Maya had tried to destroy them with one lie that grew into many. But in the end, the truth had been stronger. More importantly, their commitment to each other had been stronger. 6 months after Maya's departure, life had settled into a comfortable new normal for David and Grace. The house in the suburbs had become a true home, filled with Grace's photographs on the walls and David's collection of cooking gadgets in the kitchen. On weekends, they hosted small dinner parties for family and friends, slowly rebuilding the social connections that had been strained during the crisis. David's career had fully recovered. The Henderson account had been a major success, leading to his promotion to senior partner at Thompson & Associates. He now had a corner office and a team of junior accountants working under him. More importantly, he'd gained a reputation for integrity. The way he'd handled the false accusations had impressed his colleagues and clients alike. Grace's photography business had also flourished. The family portrait studio had expanded, and she'd recently been hired to photograph a series of local weddings. She'd even hired an assistant, a recent art school graduate named Lily who reminded Grace of herself a few years ago. Eager, talented, and full of dreams. But the past hadn't entirely released them. One Tuesday afternoon, as Grace was reviewing proofs for a client, her phone rang with a call from an unfamiliar Portland number. "Grace Chen?" A professional female voice asked. "Yes, speaking. This is Detective Sandra Morrison with the Portland Police Department. I'm calling about Maya Rodriguez. She listed you as a reference for a character witness statement, but when I looked into your relationship, I found some concerning information. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Grace's stomach tightened. "What's this about?" "Ms. Rodriguez was arrested last week for fraud and identity theft. She was working as a personal assistant to an elderly woman and allegedly stole over $40,000 from the woman's accounts. During our investigation, we discovered a pattern of similar behavior, including evidence of the harassment campaign she conducted against you and your husband last year." Grace sat down heavily in her chair. "I didn't know. We haven't been in contact with her since she left." "That's probably wise," Detective Morrison said. "The reason I'm calling is that the district attorney is building a case, and your testimony about her past behavior could be relevant. It helps establish a pattern of manipulation and deceit. Would you be willing to provide a statement?" Grace thought about it. Part of her wanted nothing to do with Maya ever again. But another part, the part that remembered the elderly woman who had been victimized, knew this was about more than her own hurt feelings. "Yes," Grace said. "I'll provide a statement." When she told David that evening, his reaction was immediate. "Absolutely, we both will. What she did to that elderly woman is criminal. She needs to face consequences." Over the next few weeks, They each met with prosecutors and provided detailed accounts of Maya's manipulation. The staged photographs, the false messages, the deliberate campaign to destroy their marriage. They provided phone records, email logs, and statements from family members who had been contacted by Maya. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 40s named Jennifer Lawson, listened intently. "This is extremely helpful," she said. "What Ms. Rodriguez did to you wasn't technically illegal. It was horrible, but manipulation and gossip aren't criminal offenses. However, it demonstrates a pattern of calculated deception that goes directly to her character and intent in the current case." "What will happen to her?" Grace asked. "If convicted on all counts, she's looking at 3 to 5 years in prison, plus restitution to the victim. The judge will consider her history when sentencing." The trial took place 3 months later in early fall. David and Grace sat in the courtroom as character witnesses, watching as Maya was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit. She looked different, thinner, older somehow, her eyes carrying a hardness that hadn't been there before. When their turn came to testify, Grace spoke calmly and clearly about Maya's behavior. She explained how Maya had systematically worked to destroy her marriage through lies and manipulation. She described the psychological toll it had taken, the family relationships that had been damaged, and the professional consequences David had faced. On cross-examination, Maya's defense attorney tried to paint Grace as vindictive, someone who was exaggerating past conflicts to punish her former friend. But Grace remained steady. "I'm not here because I'm vindictive," Grace said quietly. "I'm here because the court asked for my testimony. Maya made choices that hurt many people. She needs help, absolutely, but she also needs to face consequences for those choices. Otherwise, she'll keep hurting people." David's testimony was similar, factual, measured, and devastating in its detail. When he described how Maya's anonymous email had nearly cost him his career, several jury members shook their heads in disgust. The most powerful testimony, however, came from Maya's recent victim, Eleanor Patterson, an 82-year-old widow who had hired Maya as a companion and assistant. Mrs. Patterson described how Maya had gradually gained her trust, taking over her finances under the guise of helping, then systematically draining her accounts. "She seemed so kind at first," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice wavering. "She listened to my stories, helped me with groceries, drove me to doctor's appointments. I thought she was my friend. I even put her in my will. Then I discovered my savings were gone. The money I'd planned to leave to my grandchildren, the emergency fund I'd built over 40 years, all gone." Maya sat at the defense table with her head down, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. At sentencing 2 weeks later, the judge was not lenient. "Ms. Rodriguez," Judge Brennan said, looking down at Maya from the bench, "you have demonstrated a pattern of manipulative behavior that targets vulnerable people. You exploited friendship, you exploited trust, and in the case of Mrs. Patterson, you exploited age and loneliness. This court takes such predatory behavior very seriously." She sentenced Maya to 4 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation and mandatory restitution of the stolen funds plus penalties. She also ordered Maya to continue psychological treatment and prohibited her from working in any caretaking or trust-based position during her probation. As Maya was led away, she looked back at Grace one last time. Her expression was complicated: shame, anger, regret, all mixed together. Grace met her eyes steadily but without malice. She felt no satisfaction in seeing Maya punished, but she felt a sense of closure. Justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, Mrs. Patterson approached David and Grace. "Thank you for testifying," she said, taking Grace's hand in both of hers. "The prosecutor said your statements helped convince the jury that this wasn't just a one-time mistake. She's done this before, and she would have done it again." "I'm sorry for what she did to you," Grace said sincerely. Mrs. Patterson smiled sadly. "Lonely old women are easy targets, dear. We're just grateful when someone pays attention to us. But you too, you were supposed to be her friends. In some ways, what she did to you was worse because you had history together. Grace nodded, feeling the truth of those words. Betrayal always hurt more when it came from someone you loved. That evening, David and Grace sat on their back porch, watching the sun set over their garden. The first frost had come, browning the last of the summer flowers, but spring bulbs were already planted underneath, waiting for their time to bloom. "How do you feel?" David asked, reaching over to take Grace's hand. "Sad," Grace admitted. "Not for her exactly, but for what could have been. If she'd just talked to me about her feelings, if she'd gotten help sooner, maybe things would be different." "Some people don't want help," David said gently. "They want to stay in their pain because it's familiar. It justifies their choices." "I know. I just wish." Grace trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. "You can wish things had been different while still accepting that they weren't," David said. "That's allowed." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of easy quiet that only comes with true intimacy. The ordeal with Maya had tested them in ways they never expected, but it had also taught them lessons they might never have learned otherwise. They'd learned the importance of communication, really talking to each other instead of assuming they understood what the other was thinking. They'd learned about boundaries and the need to protect their relationship from outside interference, no matter how well-meaning it might seem. They'd learned that trust, once broken, requires active effort to rebuild. Most importantly, they'd learned that they were stronger together than any force trying to pull them apart. A few weeks later, Grace received a letter forwarded from the prison. She recognized Maya's handwriting on the envelope and almost threw it away unopened. But curiosity won out. The letter was surprisingly honest. "Dear Grace, I know I don't deserve your time or attention, but I needed to write this. Not because I expect forgiveness, but because you deserve the full truth. I was jealous of you. Not just recently, but for years. Since high school, actually. You were everything I wanted to be. Confident, talented, loved. And every time I saw you succeed, something inside me twisted. Instead of being happy for my friend, I resented you. When my life fell apart and you took me in, I should have been grateful. You offered me kindness when I needed it most. But instead, I saw an opportunity to finally take something from you, to make you feel the pain I'd been feeling for so long. I told myself I was protecting you, that David must be cheating because no one could really be that devoted. But the truth is, I couldn't stand seeing you happy when I was miserable. So I tried to make you as miserable as I was. What I did to Mrs. Patterson was different, but also the same. I saw someone with something I wanted, and I took it. I've spent my life taking from people because I couldn't figure out how to build anything for myself. I'm in therapy now. Real therapy, not just the sessions I told you about before. My therapist says I have what's called comparative thinking, that's been poisoning my relationships for years. I'm working on it, but it doesn't erase what I've done. I don't expect you to respond to this letter. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that none of it was your fault. You were a good friend. You were always a good friend. I was the broken one who couldn't appreciate it. I hope you and David have the beautiful life you deserve. And I'm truly, deeply sorry for trying to destroy it. Maya." Grace read the letter twice, then showed it to David. They discussed it that evening over dinner. "Do you believe her?" David asked. "I think she believes what she wrote," Grace said carefully. "Whether that translates into actual change, I don't know. 4 years in prison might give her time to work on herself. Or it might just make her bitter and harder. Are you going to write back?" Grace thought about it for a long moment. "No," she finally said. "I've said everything I needed to say in court. She needs to work on herself for herself now, not for my approval or forgiveness." David nodded. "That seems wise." Grace folded the letter and put it in a drawer. It was part of her history, but it didn't need to be part of her present. She and David had moved forward, and that was where she intended to stay. As winter settled in and the holidays approached, David and Grace hosted their first Christmas party in the new house. The living room was decorated with lights and a tree Grace had insisted on cutting down themselves from a local farm. Family members who had been caught up in Maya's web of lies were now laughing and sharing stories, the wounds slowly healing into scars. Patricia Chen pulled Grace aside at one point. "I owe you a deeper apology," she said. "I should have trusted my son's character more than gossip. I should have asked questions before making judgments." "You were trying to protect me," Grace said generously. "I understand that now." "Still," Patricia said, squeezing her hand, "I'm proud to have you as my daughter-in-law. You and David weathered a storm that would have destroyed weaker couples." Later that evening, as guests were leaving and David was cleaning up the kitchen, Grace stood at the window looking out at their snow-covered yard. The garden she'd planted was dormant now, hidden under white blankets, but she knew it was still there beneath the surface, preparing for spring. Her marriage was like that garden, she thought. Maya had tried to poison it, to uproot what they'd planted together. But the roots had gone deeper than anyone realized. And now, after the long winter of doubt and pain, they were growing again, stronger than before. David came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "How lucky we are," Grace said, leaning back against him. "How easily this could have gone differently." "But it didn't," David said firmly. "We didn't let it. We fought for us." Grace turned in his arms to face him. "Promise me something. Anything. If we ever face something like this again, if someone tries to come between us or if we start drifting apart, promise we'll remember this. Remember that what we have is worth fighting for." David cupped her face in his hands. "I promise. Always." They kissed then, a kiss that felt like a renewal of their vows, a recommitment to the life they were building together. Outside, snow continued to fall softly, covering everything in clean white peace. Inside, surrounded by the remnants of a party filled with family and love, David and Grace stood together. Tested, wounded, but ultimately unbroken. Maya had tried to destroy their marriage with one lie that spiraled into many. But in the end, the truth had proven stronger. More than that, their love, imperfect, tested, but genuine, had proven stronger. And that, Grace thought as she held her husband close, was the only ending that mattered. Thank you so much for following David and Grace's journey through all 5 chapters. Their story reminds us that jealousy and manipulation can come from unexpected places, even from people we consider friends. But it also shows us that trust, honesty, and commitment can overcome even the most calculated betrayal. What lessons did you take away from this story? Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone close to you? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's going through something similar. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about relationships, family dynamics, and life lessons. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Remember, protect your relationships, communicate openly with your partner, set healthy boundaries with others, and never let anyone plant seeds of doubt about the people you love. Trust is precious. Guard it carefully. Until the next story, take care of yourselves and the people you love. Goodbye.